Hello, everybody. We are going on to the next phase. Now, at the moment, all we have showing is body armor, if that's what it is. And I want to show this lighter part up. And you do that by painting the background. Now, if I wet the brush thoroughly, and this is raw water. This is nothing marvelous about this at all, raw water. And I'm running it up the edge there so that it's just level with his, well, where the drawing line is. And I put it around here. And just a little bit here. Now, if I carry that water on beyond that mark, we want to show his hand, and there's a bit down here as well. But I'm wetting the paper way beyond where I'm interested in the lightness to show. And if I pick up some paint, I don't want it to be too strong. This is an indication. I can always make it stronger if I want it. And I'm just going to introduce some paint to that area there so that it runs in the water that I have put down first. Just enough to point up the fact that there's something there. Just enough. Maybe a little bit stronger than that. So while it's as wet as this, I can do it again because the paint particles will move. So I'm just making it a little stronger. There's lots of wet paper that it hasn't spread to, so I'm quite happy about that. You know, and not. I just want it to move out a little bit. So if you look at the line I've got, and I want to make it look a bit more interesting, I don't want to make. I'm not sweeping it out to make it dramatic. All I'm trying to do is emphasize this bit here. It's got a bit too adventurous there, so I'll just mop it up. Just something you can do with these paints that aren't staining. Now, is there anywhere else while I'm doing this that could do with a little bit of assistance? Well, maybe around here where his boot is. So again, if I just run the water on the background, I don't have to join it up to that. And this one a little bit, perhaps. Maybe these ought to join. Maybe I ought to I don't even have to do the same degree of color as that, as long as it makes a pleasing shape when I've finished. In fact, I could even make that a little bit darker in there because it's a nice little shadow there, isn't it? And let that bleed out into this. Just makes it look a little bit more interesting. That edge, spread the edge with a bit of water, and then it sort of bleeds out again. And perhaps a little bit round here. So again, we start with the water to define the edge, because the paint won't easily run further than the water you have put down. And if you put down a larger amount of water than you actually want the paint to run to, and you don't put much paint in, when you get it in, it will just run as far as it can manage. And if you're careful about not putting in too much, then that just makes it a bit more manageable for you. So I haven't painted all the way around him. There are areas where he will need it, like on his dark skirt there. That doesn't really need it. And we can just take that away from there. Right. So perhaps we could just make it a little stronger up at the top there. Up here a bit. After all, his head is quite important, isn't it? While it's wet, this is fine. Don't do it once it's dry. And I think that is just enough. By the time I finish painting the rest of him, that part will be just enough to define the light parts of his body, where the light is catching the arm here and the top of the head there. So I think that's coming along quite nicely. Right, so now we can get on with the rest of the picture. I'll go do the easy bit first. That's his boots down here. Now you can see, if you look at it, they are almost as dark as the body armor or whatever this leather shirt is up here. I'm thinking it's leather. It might be fabric. We don't know what it is, but it's quite dark. And if I remember rightly, I made the dark by mixing the burnt sienna with a bit of burnt umber. It gives me quite a dark. So that's quite dark. I think that's so dark. It's a bit much. So I'll put in a bit more of the burnt sienna in it. That's better, more like it. Right, okay. So I'm going to start with that in his trousers here. Because that's dry, I can go right up to that edge there now. There we are. And that sweeps straight down into his boots down here. So we can go straight down into that boot there. Straight down here. And if you look, that shadow goes across the top of the little thing he's standing on. So we've got a curve here on his boot, and then a straight bit, and then a straight down bit. And then it goes into that shadow there. And picks up on the back of this one here too. So that shadow goes into that shadow. There we are. Right, so this is, let's get this organized first. Now there's two ways of doing this. One is to put lighter paint on, and the other is to put the paint on and take the paint off to make it lighter. So I want to get this darker anyway up here, so I can continue with this for a bit. I am dropping in the darker paint near the top here because his upper garment is going to throw quite a strong shadow over his pants. So much so that the shadows that those pants throw on this leg are just not visible. So that still comes down onto here. I think if I take some paint and water off the brush and pick up some of the sienna and put that on here, and the top of the that is also lighter. And that is lighter. Paint is so over. That is lighter. Now we're approaching the danger area here because this part here is still wet. However, if I use a small brush, which is basically just a little bit damp, take up quite a bit of paint. So I'm using practically neat paint. I can put the contact shadow in here, which works quite nicely. And while that could be even darker, because it is a contact shadow when all said and done. And then I can just put in this weird toe on his boot here. That's working quite nicely. Now this is wet around here, and that shadow was drifted too far. So I'm going to take it out. Now I can do this because I'm using burnt sienna and burnt umber, and these are colors that will lift. If you use something like alizarin for doing this, you'll find you can't lift it, and you're left with a stain. This needs to be painted darker, but I'm just going to leave it the way it is at the moment because the area around it is so wet. Now I go over to this leg here where there's a bit more variation. So I'm going to start with the burnt sienna, quite thick. I'm sure you're realizing that I'm painting this much more carefully than I normally do. This is because of the style of painting that it is. If I was doing it as a sort of free sketch, then there wouldn't have been as much drawing and there would have been much more loose application of paint. So this, if you like, is a study. So it produces a different kind of painting, which I sometimes, very rarely, like to do. So, okay. So here we have this trouser leg. And it comes down a bit further than the other one. And it's here. Now we can go over the whole of this boot with well, not the whole of it, most of it. Down this far. Right. And while it's as dark as that, I'm going to use neat paint of the raw sienna, the burnt sienna rather, not the burnt sienna, right in it, burnt umber, the darker of the two, just to put in here, because this trouser is throwing quite a shadow just on part of his and I can pull it round a bit with a small brush to help that curve, because there'll be a contact shadow there. Now this comes down the back of this boot to some extent. That's not that pretty static paint. There's another contact shadow just about there. So all I'm doing is pulling out the paint to produce that. Because what I mean by contact shadow is where two things join. One tends to throw a shadow on the other. And if you get the contact shadow in, it just makes your picture more believable. Right? Now, that's a bit of a strong line that I don't need. So I'm going to paint this part again to give that a chance to bleed across a bit. This is okay here. Now, if I take the water out of the brush, I've got a dry brush, so I'm just using the wet paint that's on the paper now. I'm pulling it round his boot here. So I'm doing two things, using up the wetness in the paint that's there, and I can put it on the top of the stand that he's standing on. And because there's so little paint there, it's not going to cause me any problems. Now again, we've got a contact shadow. So this is in shadow here. Contact shadow there. And again, it thickens up as it rounds his toe. I wonder if they were comfortable. And round about here, just here, there is another shadow here, quite a strong shadow, just there, because of the way the light is catching. I think I can afford to pull this shadow down a bit more. Down here. Well, when that dries out, the light and shade will be a bit more evident. How are we doing over here? Well, that's pretty dry, so I can continue with that now. To pull it needs to be darker than that. That's too dark. Use the other brush. Come on, stop being lazy. Needs to be a bit darker than that. Now I've lost that shadow there. It's much darker, so I'm going to wait until it's dry and go back to that. But while I've got this paint here, I'll do these. I'll put those down there. Right, okay. So that's reasonably all right. Now I need to get at his head. And that means stretching across the picture. So what I'm going to do is turn it upside down. And as long as both the image that I'm copying and the image that I'm painting is upside down, I should be all right. See, I've dripped the paint over his head. Fortunately, it's all right. I guess I'll get it organized. There we are. This is head. Right. So I've changed the image I'm copying because I've dropped water on the other one. I'm going to use a smaller brush for this. And the first thing I need to do is put some color on his face, I think. The very top of his brow, the top of his top knot, and this part is light. So I'm going to try to leave them light, but I'm putting paint on the rest of him. And it comes up the side here. And up the side here. I'm just painting the whole of the area that is going to have further decoration on it. This just comes round here. A little bit there. It comes round here. And his face this far up is also painting his face in here, just to get some colour on so that we're starting from a sensible place. Now then. Right. Now then. This is where, if you're going to make it work, you've got to pay attention to the shapes. I don't know if I'm going to win. Okay, all bets are off, but one can but try. Now I've used the umber there to create that dark shadow under his face and that dark shadow there. So I've got to continue with that. That umber comes up here. I might even repaint that bit of umber there so that we have it seamless, because it is pretty seamless. This is quite clear around here where his chin is. Then the shadow sweeps up the side of his face. And round about here, it sort of stops, because if you look, there's almost a curvy line around there. And round about there, that was accidental, is his nose. And there's his mouth is down here somewhere. It's a bit wet, so I should have, should have been patient. I think it's a little bit further over. I'll blot that out. I think the thing to do with that was to let this dark area dry first before I put that in, because those are quite strong shadows there. So let's take that burnt umber, and it stops there, and then there's a squiggle here where his ear is. This is practically neat paint. I don't really want it to move very far. This area here is this very dark color too. Right, I think we're doing okay. And that's the start of that contact line. Oh, we did. Right. Okay. Now then, that does continue over here a bit. His eyes are about, don't forget the eyes are about halfway down the head, and they are you want the center line of his face is about there. So these eyes and eyebrows are going to be well over this side of his face. They're not close to that side at all. There's a sort of curve. Yeah, these are very fine lines, very small brush. Thickens up a bit there, by the side of his nose. And then it turns off over there. Well, that's a possibility. Upside down, I don't know if it looks right or not. That spreads a bit over there. This is where the ear is, around here. Right, now then. His eyes appear to be much lower down and are that sort of shape. Breathe deeply. This one goes the head. Right here we have his nose. Remember that. Now that line is correct. So I'm going to decreep it. Get back. No, I'm not going to decreep it. It refuses. Oh no. There we go. Right. Now, his nose, doing it upside down is a good idea because it's not a face then anymore. It's just shapes. I know this is his nose, but it doesn't look nose shaped. It's just a splodge of a particular shape. And I'm curving it like that. And his top lip is in shadow. So we've got the top lip in shadow. I think he's got a tash actually, hasn't he? Can't see his tash, right? And then there's a shadow under his bottom lip, around about there. And right, darling. There we have his chin. Okay. I think. I think we can probably put a bit more of the shadow up here because it is very dark. This part up here. And his ear is much more visible than I've allowed for. So he's not going to get his ear, I'm afraid. He's poor benighted soul without an ear. Right, I'm going to turn it the other way around now to see how successful I've been. Well, I don't think he looks very like him, to be fair. But I've got, actually what's happened is I've got the slant too much. And the contrast is too great. So let's see if I can do something better about this. I'm going to paint his face a little bit darker. Right. Well, not perfect, but he's there, sort of. In the time that's left, you can. I'm going to put in some of the detailing on his costume. You can put in the seems to be all right. There's some over on this side, we've got some. Should actually wet that. So I'm going to, because it isn't a line as such, it's a bit blurred. I'll try again. Those are ridges, they're not lines. So what I've done is to clean the brush, and with a damp brush, just put a mark next to that line I've drawn, so that it softens it a little bit, so that it looks more like it's curved. And you need to do something to this hand to make it look more real. There's a strong shadow in there. And this is his hand coming down here. Touch of shadow on the thumb there and on the wrist. If I put it on and again wet the edge so that the shadow isn't too definite, that might help just a little bit. Makes the hand marginally more real. I can't really see what that hand is doing, so that does make it a bit difficult. And that hand there is also too white. It's just needs a bit of colour on it and a bit of darker colour on the bottom there. Don't gallop. There we are. It seems to be all right. Oh, I was going to come back to those, wasn't I? Because I haven't really finished these. Thing to make it absolutely right is to get some thick paint on here. Darker. Because this, that's a curve, that's flat, that comes down, that comes across, and that's on there. Just makes the shadow a bit more. In actual fact, because of the way the lighting is, there aren't many other shadows there. They're very pale. The light's coming from up here. So I could, in fact, put some shadows in over here, but I'd be rushing them, and I don't think that's a very sensible thing to do. So I'll stop there.